G'day Earthlings, Dr. Rank here, and welcome to Gaming Legends, the show that can't hold on much longer, but will never let go. 3 years before he handed the torch to Tails in Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic the Hedgehog got to experience a good 3D platforming game for the first time. But after being stuck in the second dimension for so long, I wonder if he's even ready for analog movement. Can you beat Sonic Adventure without pressing up or down? The rules are simple. We must beat the game from a new save file without ever giving up or down directional inputs during gameplay. Menu screens are fair game, and all other inputs, including horizontal directions, are fully allowed. This run is only vaguely possible in the Steam release of Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut, which not only allows for in-game controller customization, but also lets you remap every cardinal direction on the joystick individually. You can never accidentally press up like an idiot, even if your fingers are literally made of butter. Additionally, to keep the run interesting, free camera mode must only be used when it's absolutely necessary. We'll be using auto camera mode for the majority of the playthrough. And lastly, all forms of cheat codes and external modification are banned. When it comes to character choice, you might be tempted to choose the roughest of the rest of them, but it's not quite that simple. Sonic is our only option at the start of the game, but we gain access to a new character upon meeting them for the first time. Consequently, this video will be focused on finishing Sonic's story first. Immediately upon starting a new game, we're thrust into a boss fight. While we are allowed to move left and right in this run, I decided to show off and beat Chaos Zero without moving the joystick at all. Sonic has two basic movement options besides walking. The spin dash gives you instantaneous forward momentum in the direction Sonic is facing, but can only travel along the ground. Meanwhile, the homing attack can be used for a short burst of movement in mid-air and always steer Sonic towards the nearest available target. In this case, the nearest target is Chaos himself. However, we can only lock onto targets if we're facing in their general direction, and the first thing Chaos does after the second hit is sneak under us. We can get around this by intentionally taking damage, which pushes us backwards and puts Chaos in range for a third homing attack, draining his health bar to 0. One plane crash later, we arrive in the Station Square hub world, thankfully facing directly towards the entrance to Emerald Coast, which is a single spin dash away. It's here where a theoretical no joystick at all run would die, as the spin dash can only travel in a straight line, which is very much not compatible with the shoreline. Hence why this run allows the use of left and right inputs. Obviously we can use them to just straight up walk, but this is heavily restricted by the camera angle. You can rotate it with the L and R buttons, but this isn't sustainable long term as the camera tends to follow your direction of movement. Most of the run will have you spin dashing everywhere, which you can thankfully steer very slightly. If Sonic is in the middle of a jump or spin dash, moving the joystick left or right will cause him to rotate slowly rather than snapping to one direction. This can sometimes send you backwards depending on your last known trajectory, but you can influence this by running into a wall to change your angle. You'll also discover that while dash pads are your best friends in this run, springs are your worst enemies. While you can use a homing attack to get onto a spring, you can't homing attack afterwards unless it's the oblong variant. If you get launched by a spring, you'll just have to hope the camera can cooperate long enough to land on solid ground. Emerald Coast doesn't have any major roadblocks, letting us easily rescue Tails and recover the purple Chaos Emeralds. After spending way too long getting through this door, we eventually catch the train to the Mystic Ruins hub area, where we have our first encounter with Dr. Identity Crisis. Boss fights have one glaring issue in this run. The camera always focuses on the boss and can't be rotated manually. We can theoretically move anywhere, but we need to rely on the boss moving to the right spot first. Since the Egg Hornet has to dive towards us before we can damage it, this means we're more likely to be facing away from it when a window to attack opens. Damage boosts can help with this, but we need to make sure there's rings within reach afterwards. On my successful attempt, I got lucky and managed to turn around at just the right angle for the second hit after dodging it. If you have rings by the time he dives the third time, victory is yours. Up at Tails' workshop, we find the most annoying obstacle in this run, one that should be familiar to Semicraft viewers. Keys. The Windstone and other items like it are required to access certain levels, and you can't do a spin dash or homing attack while holding one. The only ways to move with it are to use your legs like a caveman. You do have the option of throwing the key by pressing the action button in mid-air, which can be a good soft lock prevention mechanism, but then you still have to pick it up again. This becomes especially tedious in narrow passageways like this, where you basically have to zigzag back and forth with both Sonic and the camera just to move forward. Eventually, we can deposit the Windstone and enter Windy Valley. At the start of the level, we can bypass the first checkpoint with a homing attack chain over to this Thunder Shield. Though if you choose not to do that, the bottom path is still viable. After the second checkpoint is a wind bridge that only exists for a short time, forcing us to fall back down after a few seconds. Simply spin dashing into it doesn't give us enough momentum. Thankfully, we can keep ourselves going by just holding right while we're on the bridge, though doing so for too long leaves you liable to fall off at the other end. This trampoline also gave me a bit of trouble, but I was eventually able to hold the camera sideways long enough to make the jump. The rest of the stage is easy, save for this particular loop-de-loop that requires you to hold right to maintain enough momentum. After grabbing the blue emeralds, we need to grab an item that's a little more tangibly useful to us. In the sewers beneath Station Square lie the Lightspeed shoes, which unlock Sonic's Lightspeed dash ability. This move allows Sonic to dash forward as well as follow trails of rings with both direction and magnitude. After executing our first one during its tutorial though, we're in a bit of a pickle. This hallway is one of the few areas where the camera is completely static, and the door out of here is at the back of the room.
This presents a problem.
I was eventually able to land beside the door facing it, where I could then break through by spamming spin dashes. The only drawback to the Lightspeed dash is that, unlike later games, it has to be charged up by holding the spin dash button. Fortunately, this problem can be alleviated by grabbing the crystal ring in the hotel lobby, which cuts the charging time in half. Plus, I later realized that if you lightspeed dash into a wall, you're less likely to change direction, which comes in handy for entering doors. Casinopolis is the easiest level in the game. To reach the emeralds, we just need to deposit a few hundred rings, which can easily be farmed in the pinball machine. Though I should mention that I originally swapped the L and R buttons to make the camera movement feel more natural, failing to realize that it would also swap the flipper buttons. That strategy is not recommended. Once I got up to the emerald though, it took me a while to actually grab it since the camera is fixed up here. I eventually managed to get a homing attack in the dead center of the screen, letting us retrieve and then immediately lose the white emeralds. After smuggling the ice stone through customs, we get to Ice Cap, whose entrance requires you to climb up a ladder. Thankfully, you can just pan the camera over and move sideways to climb it. Act 1 of Ice Cap proper was a little tedious since Sonic kept turning around to face downhill, but it was still very much doable. Act 2, meanwhile, was extra frustrating. At the top of the level is a narrow ice bridge that collapses shortly after stepping on it. If you fall off, you have to climb all the way back up for another attempt. You could theoretically spin dash all the way across, but the angle is too precise for that to be viable. Instead, you'll have to run across with the camera pointing sideways. This is easier said than done, as you need to stop a couple times to readjust the camera, but after several tries, I managed to reach the checkpoint. Once you reach the snowboard section in Act 3, the level is basically won already. Our next stop is the boss fight against Knuckles, which is barely worth mentioning. Immediately after, though, is the nightmare that was Chaos 4. The arena is covered in water that basically acts like quicksand, making spin dashes much less effective. And we can only damage Chaos when he surfaces, which happens in effectively random locations. But we do have a secret weapon. Yes, the camera hates looking away from the boss, but it has an even stronger hatred for passing through solid walls. If we go to the edge of the arena, the camera will turn around, letting us more easily line ourselves up to face chaos and spam homing attacks until we catch up to him. It's definitely tedious, but it's definitely possible. Up next is Sky Chase Act 1, which is everyone's favorite genre, the rail shooter. While we do have access to the horizontal axis, I decided not to move at all just to see if it was possible. Turns out, it is! You can just spam the fire button and you automatically win. After surviving a plane crash by impersonating an ostrich, we rendezvous with Amy and enter Twinkle Park via cutscene. Act 1 is easy, just commit Grand Theft Auto and hold the jump button to win. Act 2 is mostly outdoors and spacious, but these two towers are a bit far apart for my liking. The good news is there's a ring box we can homing attack on the other side. The bad news is item boxes don't respawn when you die, so you only get to do this once. Though it's a good thing there's a checkpoint right after. The platforming section immediately after was a nightmare, but we can skip it with a mid-air lightspeed dash to get onto the roof of the castle. From there, we can follow the roof along the outside and hit one final spring to reach the goal. After completely ignoring the Twinkle Circuit minigame, we have the last and easiest required key of Sonic's campaign.
You have her card key, right?
Of course I have a card key. I told you I'd get her card key. I went and got her card key, and now I have her card key.
The glass roof in Speed Highway was a bit troublesome, as my homing attacks kept targeting the enemies and springs beneath me. One of those attacks even gave me enough momentum to run right off the edge. Thankfully, this issue can be fixed by simply spin dashing across the entire thing. We can't maintain enough momentum to stay on this wall, but there's thankfully a platform beneath us, and this route is equally viable. There is a narrow tunnel just here where the camera is locked, but there's plenty of curved surfaces to keep us facing the right way. The end of the tunnel can be a bit finicky, so I recommend using a lightspeed dash on the last ring. The going down section is an auto-scroller, but just for fun, I tried to avoid horizontal input here. Turns out, the pillars don't damage you if you hit them, they just slow you down. The dawn section is nice and open, with only the final jump to the capsule being particularly difficult. After Amy fails at the one job she was given, we head over to Angel Island and obtain Sonic's final upgrade, the Ancient Light. From now on, if we use a lightspeed dash when near an enemy, it will instead execute a lightspeed attack, homing in on all nearby targets at once. And while I didn't know this at the time, you can also use it to deal double damage against bosses. Red Mountain was one of the more challenging stages in the run. We can climb up using the rockets, but we can't homing attack afterwards, and the camera likes to do stuff on its own. The first rocket thankfully has a ledge directly to our right, letting us easily stick the landing. The second one has a much narrower ledge, though we do have just enough time to rotate the camera for it. The monkey bars in the tunnel are a viable route, but also a tedious one, so I instead recommend using a homing attack on the spring directly. This section right here is easy, since the crumbling sections actually propel you further along the level. After the zip line is this section, which caused me many deaths. The safest method is to do a short spin dash jump over, followed by a few homing attacks. After the crumbling bridge, we reach a fork in the road. If we head right past the lava geyser, we eventually reach this rocket. The ledge afterwards is too far upwards to reach, and the camera doesn't rotate fast enough. I tried charging up a lightspeed dash beforehand, but the rocket seemingly cancels the charge. Instead, we have to do a homing attack chain on these spinners, the last of which hits a 1-up box that doesn't respawn. Just be aware that Sonic won't always be facing the next target, leaving you liable to fall, but at least it's sometimes possible. Another homing attack chain gets us to the seesaws, where I initially assumed the camera was fixed. I was able to get through most of the seesaws by taking advantage of the sloped terrain and just sliding along the ground, but the last one seemed impossible like this. Then I actually tried moving the camera, and it worked. Once you hit the checkpoint, you can get across the bridge either with a lightspeed dash or a couple homing attacks. That path leads to another rocket, and while you can't land directly on the ground, you can land on the cliff beside it, then use spin dashes to save yourself. though it's probably easier to take this ring trail instead, which leads to a rocket that's much more convenient. Act 2 is where Red Mountain really shows its true colors. The hallways aren't too bad, save for being forced to jump around the wall running portion here, but the rising lava section is where they get ya. The camera is fixed along these ramps, and you seldom have time to turn yourself around properly. Fortunately, the lava only rises when you reach specific trigger points, and the edges of the ramps allow for full camera movement, though you will still want to enter these sections with a spin dash jump. Once you reach the final checkpoint, there's just one hallway left, and while it does have a restricted camera, it's far from difficult, letting us take one final rocket straight up to the capsule. This leads into Sky Chase Act 2, which I once again cleared without even moving. Even the boss fight against the egg cannon is possible. Alright, Tails, deploy the landing gear.
Landing gear?
Landing gear?
Act 1 of Skydeck has these pillars that Sonic can shimmy along, and jumping off them automatically turns Sonic to face away from the wall. The ramps here were a little cumbersome to climb, but thankfully the guardrails are curved enough to get through with just spin dashes. Act 2 has strong winds trying to push you off, and turning right at the first fork leaves you extra vulnerable to them. Instead, turn left to go slightly more uphill. It's still not going to be easy with all the cannons, but it's much more reliable. The falling platform section requires speed and quick thinking. If you don't have enough time to reach the end of the current platform, jump sideways and change lanes. Act 3 is the hardest part, requiring you to fight against the skewed gravity. This makes ladders almost impossible to climb up normally, even with the camera facing the right way. Spin dash jumping over to the checkpoint is far more consistent. I then recommend doing another one over to the conveyor belts, bypassing the moving platforms. The monkey bar section is really finicky, since you have to get the camera lined up perfectly to swing in the right direction, and to get a clear enough shot at the springs. And even then, sometimes Sonic will just randomly stop moving until you jump. The most annoying part is after the final checkpoint, where the camera's rotation axis makes aiming your spin dashes a chore. And then the button to get the gravity back to normal is in the least convenient spot possible, basically forcing you to headbutt every surface until you can push it. But once you do push it, the level is basically over. After an easy boss fight against E102 Gamma, we need to get the egg carrier into its original form. The room where we do this has a fixed camera, making that task difficult. There's a few different angles we can work with by standing in different spots, but getting the rings to spawn and lightspeed dashing through them is the hard part. I was able to get up by doing one lightspeed dash to follow the rings backwards, turning myself around on the blue slope, and using another lightspeed dash on the remaining rings. Once I got up there, I could easily hit the switch with some zigzagging, then homing attack out the door to meet up with Big. The boss fight against Chaos 6 requires you to freeze him with Eggman's ice bombs before you can attack, but it's not too bad. It would probably have been easier if I remembered that the lightspeed attack exists, but idiocy is still a valid strategy. We then follow Eggman by jumping off an airship at 30,000 feet. How does Sonic survive this? Because there's no fall damage in this game, obviously. Our next destination is Lost World. No, not that one. This level has a few long tunnels to deal with, but they're more annoying than anything. The camera frees up during this tube section, letting you more easily line up the jump to the next tunnel. The water chamber is essentially just a giant cylinder, so it had no business being as obnoxious as it was. I recommend boarding the snake from just behind its head, as Sonic tends to slide backwards along it. Falling down will make the climb back up more tedious, but Sonic jumps higher when underwater, making the journey shorter. And even at its highest, Sonic can still take a breath between layers, so you rarely have to worry about drowning. Act 2 was the hardest segment in the whole run. You're supposed to light the path by rotating the beams of light, but once you grab onto one, Sonic won't let go until it hits a mirror. This isn't an issue for the first two beams, but the remaining ones have no mirrors on the starting horizontal axis. If you grab this beam, you'll be stuck there for all eternity. The only way out of this is to pause and restart, which sends you back to the last checkpoint at the cost of 1 life. If you have no lives remaining, you'll instead have to exit the level completely and restart the entire thing. The path ahead is thankfully still visible without using the mirrors, but it still has a heavy focus on platforming in a straight line. What I recommend doing here is jumping over one gap at a time with a spin dash. You can then use the action button in mid-air to exit the ball state, which makes a pretty decent emergency brake. The part I was stuck on the longest was the boulder chase because I kept falling into this pit due to a lack of momentum. Turns out the solution was to just spam spin dashes the whole way down. Make sure you hold right after hitting the springs so you actually stick the landing. The wall running section is super easy as panning the camera all the way to the side gives you the perfect angle to climb straight up with the joystick. One final lightspeed dash later, and Lost World becomes Found World. After a brief flashback to the apocalypse, we can enter Eggman's base for the finale. There's just one problem. The entrance to Final Egg is locked behind a switch puzzle where the camera is fixed in place. We can manipulate Sonic into touching each button by entering from the sides of the area, but the actual entrance requires us to go forwards along an uphill slope.
This presents a problem.
It took me like 10 minutes just to actually enter the darn thing with a practically frame-perfect jump. The biggest obstacles in Final Egg Act 1 are the conveyor belts that you need to jump between and the cambered path leading into the tube at the end. Luckily, the camera is freely movable in most of these sections, so it's not too big a hassle. Act 2 is much more stressful, tasking you with jumping between moving platforms that you can barely see coming. Still doable, but it will give you a few heart attacks. Act 3 has this ladder in a fixed camera section, and the angle means that pressing left or right will cause Sonic to always climb down. But it's here that I discovered a much better way to climb ladders. Just jump straight up and you'll grab onto a higher rung. The fans were tedious to get through, but nothing a little camera manipulation couldn't fix. After skydiving straight downwards and somehow surviving, we just have a few more lightspeed dashes and Final Egg is complete. We're not done yet though, we still have to deal with the final boss, the Egg Viper. As soon as the battle starts, head to one of the ring stashes at the end of the arena, then turn around to face the other way. Most of the Egg Viper's attacks in Phase 1 can be dodged with a spin dash, but be prepared to cancel it with a jump if need be. When he's ready to be attacked, he always appears in front of you, waiting for you to do a homing attack chain. To face the right way, you can spin dash and steer it into the railing. You could also try a spin dash jump, but this is incredibly risky. After 3 hits, Eggman will attack from the end of the bridge. Get there first, let yourself get hit by the laser, then run to the side for the next shot. In Phase 2, Eggman will shoot Beyblades at you, but you can just jump on for an easy hit. Once you land the final blow, Eggman will go for his kamikaze attack. Run to one end of the bridge and do one final spin dash jump to hopefully dodge it just in the nick of time. The Sonic Adventure Press Up to Lose run is officially conquered. And wow, this was a fun one. No D-pad runs have been a staple of Sonic challenges, and doing one in a 3D Sonic game is an unforgettable experience. In fact, you know what? Why should I stop there? I unlocked all the other characters during this run, so naturally I should try it with them. And that's exactly what I'll be doing in the next video. In the meantime, you can watch the run for yourself via the link in the description, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2. That's all for now, and I will see you down under.